माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा शील प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा शील प्रभुपदा जो विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक सदस्य श्रीमद निजवेंद्र शेष भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। इस्कॉन संस्थापक जय श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जो विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक सदस्य श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। जो विष्णुपाद श्री गौर किशोर दास बाबू महाराज की जय। जो विष्णुपाद सच्चिदानंद सरस्वती भक्तिविनोद ठाकुर की जय। जो विष्णुपाद वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्री जगन्नाथ दास बाबू महाराज की जय। जय श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट गुना श्री जी गोपाल भट्टदास अविनाश गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। नमाचार्य श्रीदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कोई श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत दादर शिवसादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपिनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरिगोवर्धन की जय। श्री गौरांगी बेंगलोरेश्वर भगवान की जय। श्री जगन्नाथ बलदेव सुभद्रा महेश दर्शन भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। गंगामयी की जय। यमुनामयी की जय। भक्ति देव तुलसी देवी की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। इस्कॉन वर्तमान गुरुवंत की जय। श्रीमान भक्तवृंद की जय। गौर प्रेमानंद all glories to the assembly, all glories to the assembly, all glories to the assembly. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtaprayeshu Bhatreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiti. Hare Krishna. Welcome you all to this Friday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 27, text 11 and 12. Text 11 first. Mukta lingam sadava abhasam asati pradipadyate sato bandhum asakchakshuhu sarvanushyutam advayam. Translation is there for Prabhupada ki jai. A liberated soul realizes the absolute personality of Godhead, who is transcendental and who is manifest as a reflection even in the false ego. He is the support of the material cause and he enters into everything. He is absolute, one without a second, and he is the eyes of the illusory energy. A pure devotee can see the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in everything materially manifested. He is present there only as a reflection, but a pure devotee can realize that in the darkness of material illusion, the only light is the Supreme Lord who is its support. It is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita that the background of the material manifestation is Lord Krishna. And as confirmed the Brahma Samhita, Krishna is the cause of all causes. In the Brahma Samhita, it is stated that the Supreme Lord, by his partial and plenary portion, is present not only within this universe and each and every universe, but in every atom, although he is one without a second. The word Advayam, without a second, which is used in this verse, indicates that although the Supreme Personality of Godhead is represented in everything, including the atoms, he is not divided. His presence is in everything is explained in the next verse, text 12. Yata jalasta abhasah talastena vadrishyate swabhasena tata suryo jalastena divistitah. Yata jalasta abhasah talastena vadrishyate swabhasena tata suryo jalastena divistitah. Yata jalasta abhasah स्थलस्तेन दृश्यते स्वभासेन तथा सूर्यो जलस्तेन दिविस्थितः. Translation Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The presence of the Supreme Lord can be realized just as the sun is realized first as a reflection on water and again as a second reflection on the wall of a room, although the sun itself is situated in the sky. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The example given herein is perfect. The sun is situated in the sky far, far away from the surface of the earth, but its reflection can be seen in a pot of water in the corner of a room. The room is dark and the sun is far away in the sky, but the sun's reflection on the water illuminates the darkness of the room. A pure devotee can realize the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in everything by the reflection of his energy. In the Vishnu Purana, it is stated that as the presence of fire is understood by heat and light, so the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although one without a second, is perceived everywhere by the diffusion of his different energies. It is confirmed in the Isopanishad that the presence of the Lord is perceived everywhere by the liberated soul, just as the sunshine and the reflection can be perceived everywhere, although the sun is situated far away from the surface of the globe. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakya Chakshudbhaitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Mano Vishtam Sthapitam Ena Bhutale Swayam Rupakata Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Vidapatakamanam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sijivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvidamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kantan Murtite Taptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanviste Devi Pranamami Haripriye Anchakalpatarubhyasya Kripasnidhi Devi Japatitanam Pavnetto Vaishnavedyo Namo Namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Moham Karodi Vachalam Pankam Nande Digam Kapatam Hamande Shiguram Dantan Paramatam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram. Hare Krishna. So here in the first sloka, the Lord explains about the feature of the Lord as Paramatma in everyone's heart. The characteristics of Paramatma. And the next verse, that is verse number 12, is explained as to how one can realize this Lord as Paramatma. So we'll go to the first verse now, verse number 11. It says that a liberated soul realizes the absolute personality of Godhead, who is transcendental and who is manifest as a reflection even in the false ego. He is the support of the material cause and he enters into everything. He is absolute, one without a second, and he is the eyes of the illusory energy. So we'll take some of the important points mentioned here. One is the Lord is transcendental. Our body is composed of three modes of material nature, the material elements and everything. But the Lord is transcendental beyond the three modes of material nature. It is beyond even mode of goodness, beyond pure goodness. So that is why the Lord is transcendental in nature. He does not have a material body like us, nor his activities are material. All the Lord's pastimes, activities, qualities, the Lord himself, they are all transcendental in nature. So the Lord declares himself to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita chapter 15 in text, if you see 16 to 18, text 16, the Lord says there are two classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible. In the material world, every living entity is fallible, and the spiritual world, every living entity is infallible. The next sloka, the Lord tells, besides these two, there is the greatest living personality, the supreme soul, the imperishable Lord himself, who has entered the three worlds and is maintaining them. This is the Lord as Paramatma. The Lord as the super soul has entered the three worlds, upper, middle, and the lower, and is maintaining the three worlds. And then he says the following verse, because I am transcendental beyond both the fallible and infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that supreme person. So the Lord is the supreme personality of Godhead himself, who can be realized in three features, that is Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. This Paramatma is the four-handed form of the Lord, who is meditated upon by the yogis. Then the next point that is mentioned is that he is manifest as a reflection even in the false ego. The true ego is that we are not this body, but we are the spirit soul. And we are also being part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. Our constitutional position is to be the servant of the Supreme Lord. But due to our false ego, that minute independence which we have, the Lord has given us, that we want to be a proprietor or we want to be enjoyer of everything, all that we want. The Lord has given the facility of enjoyment by creation of this material world. So we cannot create this material world, but the Lord has created this material world for our desire to enjoy. So in a sense, this is also a sort of a reflection of the original spiritual world which is existing. Then he is the support of the material cause and he enters into everything. So the Lord creates this material manifestation and he enters into every universe as Garbhodakasaya Vishnu, which we will understand today as how he supports all the universes. The Lord creates innumerable universes, come out of the breathing, exhaling of the Supreme Lord in the form of bubbles. And each and every bubble is like a universe. And this universe in which we are in is supposed to be the smallest universe. And that is why the Brahma, who is creating this, who is the creator of this universe, secondary creator of this universe, is the smallest with 4 heads. Otherwise, there are universes which are bigger and bigger. And each and every universe has got a Brahma who has got many heads. So another quote given by the Lord to Lord Brahma, to Uddhava in 11th canto, the Lord says, just as the same material elements exist within and outside of all the material bodies, Similarly, I cannot be covered by anything else. I exist within everything as the super soul and outside of everything in my all-pervading feature. So as Paramatma, the Lord enters into each and every material element and also is there as an all-pervading feature everywhere as the super soul. The Lord, as Garbhodakasai Vishnu, is the super soul of all the universes. And as Kshirodakasai Vishnu, the Lord is present in everyone's heart as a super soul. So there is no difference between the Lord's existence in the material elements or externally also, because the Lord is transcendental, but He is all pervading. So He's the ultimate perfection of everything. Although He may be present in the material world as Paramatma, still He is transcendental in nature. Then in another verse in 11th canto, the Lord instructs Uddhava, I personally approve of that knowledge by which one sees the combination of 9, 11, 5 and 3 elements in all living entities and ultimately one element within those 28. Now actually we'll go into this a little bit in detail. So the explanation given is that there are 9 elements are material nature, the living entity. So, the 9 elements are material nature, the living entity, the Mahat Tattva, false ego, and the 5 objects of sense perception, namely sound, touch, form, taste, and aroma. Then the next, the 11 elements are the 5 working senses and the 5 knowledge acquiring senses, along with the coordinative sense, the mind. The 5 elements are the 5 physical elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, and sky. And the 3 elements are the 3 modes of material nature, that is goodness, passion, and ignorance. And he says that all living entities, from mighty Lord Brahma down to an insignificant weed, manifest material bodies composed of these 28 elements. But the one element within all these 28 is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Super Soul, who is all pervading within the material and the spiritual worlds. Now, this actually means that all the material elements that are created in this material manifestation, senses, the subtle body, gross body, everything, they all have the super soul, all pervading super soul in them. And it is only because of the presence of the super soul, they all have their qualities or characteristics. Now, for example, one example is given that sugar. Sugar is sweet, but that sweetness of the sugar comes with the presence of the Lord as the super soul. Otherwise, the sugar cannot be sweet. Similarly, salt. Salt is salty. And sometimes we say it is spicy. That also comes, all these characteristics come because the Lord is present as the super soul in each and every material element that is there in this universe. And He is also all pervading. Throughout the universe, He is there as an all pervading feature. So Lord Krishna is the cause of all causes, and not only the cause of all causes, all the secondary causes, and their effects are ultimately non-different from the personality of Godhead. So this knowledge, which is the real knowledge, is the essential one for perfection of one's life. So this is the ultimate knowledge, and it is essential for perfection of all human life, because the Lord is the ultimate cause, and the goal is also the Supreme Lord only. So He is absolute one without a second. So when we say one without a second, when we as a living entity are present, the jiva or the spirit soul present in our body is present only in this body. So that consciousness we are having for this body, only in this body. We cannot understand or realize the consciousness of another body. So there is an individual soul in the other body. We have an individual soul, but the super soul is one. He is undivided. Super soul cannot be divided. That's what Srila Prabhupada mentions here. One without a second means He's represented everything, including the atoms, but He is not divided. It is difficult to conceive this feature because generally our understanding or our realization comes mostly from the material point of view. That means the Lord is all pervading by His all pervading feature, but He is at the same time, He is not divided like us. Then the next point that is mentioned is the eye is the eyes of the illusory energy. That means even the illusory energy that is created by the Lord is one of his energies. There are mainly three types of energies: inferior energy, superior energy, and the marginal energy. Superior energy is that in the spiritual world. Inferior, or the spirit soul, even of the living entity, is superior in nature. The material body is inferior, and the jiva who is in us, actually we call it as marginal, because either he can be placed in the spiritual potency or the material potency. When one acts as a servant of the Supreme Lord, he is superior, and when one acts in the material platform, he is inferior. So that is why this jiva within us is called marginal or tatastha. So there are inferior, superior, and marginal. This illusory energy of the Lord is the energy, so inferior energy of the Lord. But ultimately, the Lord has created this illusory energy or Maya due to our desire. So Krishna also tells Uddhava in the 11th canto that the super soul alone is the ultimate controller and creator of this world. That means the entire creation of the manifestation of the material world is created and maintained also by the Supreme Lord as the super soul. This super soul does not exist in the spiritual world because it is not necessary. But in the material world, the super soul is a witness, is a permitter, and everything. So the soul of all existence, he maintains, he creates, maintains, and he withdraws also at the proper time. The appearance of the threefold material nature which is perceived within him has no actual basis. That means the Lord is telling that this threefold material nature is also within the Supreme Lord because he has created it, is within him, but it has no actual basis. Actual basis means it is an illusion, that which is not. Then he says that rather you should understand that this material nature composed of three modes is simply the product of his illusory potency. So the Lord has got this illusory potency by which a living entity gets bewildered. And this illusory potency also is created by the Lord. So in effect, to the conditioned soul, actually there is a duality based on the three modes of material nature. So the material manifestation is actually non-different from the Lord, but at the same time is ultimately a spiritual nature, because even a pure devotee can see the material manifestation and utilizes this. By utilizing this material manifestation in the service of the Lord. For a pure devotee, there is no difference whether it is a material world or a spiritual world. So, in effect, everything is an expansion of the potency of the Supreme Lord, actually. So, the conditioned world soul tries to lord it over the material nature, but the Lord, being non-different from the nature, is only the true proprietor. So, the Lord is a true proprietor of the material manifestation also. So, one example that is given in Srimad Bhagavatam is as to how a spider creates a web, we call it web, and enters into that web, remains in it, and then finally when the spider wounds up, that thread is wound up in its own mouth. So similarly, through his own potency, the Lord manifests this material world, maintains it, and eventually withdraws it within himself. So this way, simultaneously and inconceivably, everything is inconceivably non-different from the Lord. So, although the Lord is non-different from both his spiritual abode and his material creation, but still the Vaikuntha is always superior to the material manifestation. Both material matter and spirit are energies of the Lord. Yet the spiritual energy is molded into the eternal forms of bliss and knowledge. The spiritual energy is full of eternity, bliss, and knowledge, whereas temporary forms of matter are all of mode of ignorance and creating frustration for the conditioned souls who are covered by the illusory energy. So, we pursue, the conditioned souls pursue false happiness as a real happiness, which is what is called the illusion. And we deviate from there's a tendency for us to deviate from the loving relationship with the Lord. But a pure devotee can see the presence of personality of Godhead in everything, even materially manifested. An example is given in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Prahlad Maharaj instructs his classmates. He says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Controller, is infallible and is present in different forms of the life, from the inert living beings such as plants to Brahma, the foremost created being. That means even an inert living being such as plants and all the way up to Brahma, the Lord is present in all of them as the super soul. He is present in the varieties of material creations and the material elements also, the total material energy and the modes of material nature, as well as unmanifested material nature and the false ego. That means that God is present in everything, every material element which I mentioned earlier, and also in the three modes of material nature. Then he says that although he is one, he is present everywhere, and he is also the transcendental super soul, the cause of all causes, who is present as the observer in the course of hearts of all living entities. The Lord as the super soul observes every minute activity, even the thought process that is going in the mind of all the living entities uh, across the universe. So that is why he said that the Lord is all pervading as a super soul. And the Lord is unchanged, is undivided and is changeless. So the super soul cannot be divided like the way we think materially, whatever we think 100 can be divided by 10, it becomes 10. But the super soul is not divided. At the same time, the super soul is unchanged, is changeless, he cannot be changed. He is simply perceived as the supreme Satchidananda. So the Lord can be realized only as the supreme source of eternity, bliss, and knowledge. But being covered by the curtain of external energy to the atheist, he appears non-existent. So there are many atheists who believe that there is no God, and there are some who believe that he is one with the God. So all these are also a sort of a curtain for the curtain of the external energy by which one is covered. So as the super soul, he pervades everything in the entire creation. He exists in all circumstances and at all times. So the Lord exists at all times in all circumstances, whether it's a dog or a tree or a plant. And also, he is not really in the heart of living entity, but also in the material things, even in the atoms. Now, atom is something we cannot perceive. So here the Lord says that he is present even in the atoms, protons and electrons being explored by material scientists. So material scientists normally try to see atoms and protons and all. But ultimately, the Lord is present as the Paramatma in these atoms also. So the supreme cause is Krishna, and devotees who have surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead can realize him and his presence within the universe and within the atom. So only by performance of devotional service, one can understand that the Lord is present in everyone's heart as Paramatma and is directing the wandering living entities. We are all wandering living entities and he is directing us. But only by the process of devotional service, one can understand this presence of the Lord. So, in his instructions, the Prahlad Maharaj says that one has to, if one understands the Vaishnava philosophy, which explains how he is present everywhere and how he acts everywhere. So to worship the Supreme Lord or to realize him is not at all difficult. That means by process of devotional service, it is possible to realize the Supreme Lord as Paramatma. Realization of the Lord, however, is possible only in the association of devotees. So Prahlad Maharaj says that one can understand the presence of the Lord through the association of devotees. Because just like when one associates with a materialistic person and learns how to learn a skill of a materialistic art or anything like that. Similarly, Lord can be understood. Lord is an embodiment of devotional service. So the Lord as Paramatma can also be understood by his presence through the process of devotional service. But through some simple basic understanding. For example, we see summer, we see the changes of season. Every year we have summer, after summer we have monsoon, after monsoon we have winter. So, but the season comes and it goes. So there is somebody who is controlling these seasons. Similarly, if we look at our own body, there are so many things that are functioning within our body. Our eyes, our ears, our nose, they all have a certain function. But all these sense organs are functioning due to the presence of the Lord as the super soul. If the Lord wishes, desires that this particular uh, living entity or this particular jiva in this material body should not have eyes to, or we should not be able to see, then the super soul does not permit the jiva to see. That's why we see many are blind. Many may not be able to hear because the Lord as a super soul does not permit. But others are able to see, others are able to hear. So there is a supreme controlling authority, and that supreme controlling authority is none other than the Supreme Lord himself, present in everybody's body as the super soul. So, in Bhagavad Gita, in Brahma Samhita also, Lord Brahma says, Ishvara Parama Krishna, Satchidananda Vigraha, Anadira Adil Govinda, Sarva Karna Karna. So the Lord is the ultimate cause of all causes, and he is without a second. That indicates that although he is represented in everything, including the atoms, he is not divided. There is another quote in the sixth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where it mentions how with deliberation one can see the Supreme Soul. The translation says, with deliberation one will see that the Supreme Soul, although manifested in different ways, is actually the basis principle of everything. That means whatever is existing, the Lord is the ultimate cause and is the basic principle of existence. There cannot be existence of anything without the Supreme Lord. Then it is said, the total material energy is the cause of material manifestation, but the material energy is caused by him. That means the entire material manifestation is a creation of the material energy of the Lord, but that material energy or the inferior energy is also caused by created by the Lord. Therefore, he is the cause of all causes. He is the manifester also of the intelligence and the senses, and he is perceived as the super soul of everything. So the Lord is a manifestation, is a cause of manifestation of intelligence and all the senses, as I mentioned before. But he can be perceived as the super soul of everything. Without him, it says, everything would be dead. So you as the super soul, the supreme controller, are the only one remaining. So everything becomes dead in the absence of the Lord as the super soul. Then only the Lord is existing. That is why even after the creation, the Lord is the only personality that is existing. So Brahma Samhita also there is a quote where Lord Brahma says, Ekopyasav rachaitum jagadanda kodi yachakshirasya jagadanda chayadanta andandarasa paramanu chayantarastam govindamadi purusham tamham bhajami. He says, I worship the personality of Godhead Govinda, who enters the existence of every universe and every atom by one of his plenary portions and thus manifests his infinite energy throughout this material creation. That means the Lord enters into each and every universe and each and every atom by his plenary portion, and thus he manifests this energy throughout the material creation. Then it says, by his one plenary portion as Paramatma Antaryami, the Lord is all pervading throughout the unlimited universes. The unlimited universes, and the Lord is all pervading through all the universes as the Paramatma feature. So this Paramatma feature, just like our consciousness, we can realize through the presence of our soul, the supreme soul or the super soul is aware of the consciousness of all the living entities. We can see our body functioning, but the super soul can see the functioning of all the bodies, all the material bodies across the universe. Now, how does a devotee see everything? This is mentioned here as to how in the advanced stage of devotion service, a devotee does not see anything separate from his own interest and those of the personality of Godhead. That means the Lord's interest is that as being servants of himself, the part and parcel should serve the Lord. And the part and parcel's interest should also be that he should serve the Supreme Lord. But in the advanced stage of devotional service, both the interests become one, because for the devotee does not act on a separate interest. He acts only in the interest of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. At that time, he sees that everything in the Supreme Personality of Godhead and Supreme Personality of Godhead in everything. That means when one advances in devotional service, he sees everything in the Supreme Lord and the Supreme Lord in everything. And at this stage, one does not see a distinction between the spiritual and the material worlds. That means at an advanced stage of life, one does not look at this material world also as separate from the spiritual world. Rather, this material world also becomes a spiritual world, though it is an external energy of the Lord. So for a perfect devotee, material manifestation or spiritual manifestation, they are all same, because he's always engaged in the service of the Lord. He sees everything in the Lord and he sees the Lord in everything. So one cannot serve the Lord without being situated on the spiritual platform. Thus, if a so-called material thing is dovetailed in the service of the Lord, it is no longer considered material, which I mentioned now. So anything that is there, as long as it is dovetailed in the service of the Lord, it is not a material object, it is a spiritual object, and the process is also spiritual. Thus, a pure devotee in his perfect vision sees from all angles. So a pure devotee does not see a difference between material manifestation and spiritual manifestation. Now we come to text number 12. So the presence of the Supreme Lord can be realized just as the sun is realized first as a reflection on water and again as a second reflection on the wall of a room, although the sun is itself situated in the sky. So we see that the sun is located far, far, far miles away from us. But the sunshine or the sunlight is seen as a reflection. Supposing we keep a bucket of water, we can see the reflection of that sun in the form of the sunlight in that bucket of water. And what happens is that when there is a slight, for example, in a river, if we see in a river, there are waves, the water also is not steady. So when the sun is there, but when the water is steady, the reflection is also steady. But when the water changes its movement in the form of a wave, or is not when the water is not stable, that reflection also is not stable. So that is the quality of a jiva, which is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam also, as to how a living entity, being a small part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, he has got a tendency to quiver, just like the waves in an ocean. Like water can move, like the reflection, the sun doesn't sun is in one place, but its reflection is seen in the water as quivering or moving because the water is moving. So similarly, the jivas who are conditioned, they tend to quiver due to the exposure to the material energy. This is one example given Srimad Bhagavatam. So one can realize by seeing the reflection of the sun that there is a sun, because sun is there and its light can be seen. Now sometimes a room is dark but the sun is far away, but we might say that there is an electricity due to which light is coming. Sometimes we see the direct reflection of the sun also in the room, which may be when there are windows open at the time of sunlight, they may be able to see the sunlight. But also, it is said that even in the darkest, for example, there may be places which are fully dark. That darkness is due to the absence of the sun. But what this particular purport, it says that Even in the darkness, the only uh, vision that one looks for is light. So ultimately, the cause of all causes is the Lord Krishna himself. So the room is dark, sun is far away, but the sun's reflection is always there. It illuminates the darkness of the room. Similarly, when one is in darkness of ignorance, when he is illuminated by this knowledge of the Lord, then he becomes uh, blissful, which is what is the knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But a pure devotee can realize the presence of this personality of Godhead in everything by the reflection of this energy. So everything is a reflection of the Lord's energies, and a pure devotee can realize this. So another example is given in the Vishnu Purana. Just as the presence of fire is understood by heat and light, that means uh, when there is heat and when there is light, one can understand that this is fire. So also it states that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although one without a second, is perceived everywhere by the diffusion of his different energies. So again, the Lord is undivided, is one without a second, and he can be still perceived everywhere by the diffusion of his different energies. So the Lord is reflected in the material world through his various energies, namely inferior, superior, or marginal. So although the sun is situated far, far away from the surface of the globe, the presence of the Lord is perceived everywhere by a liberated soul, just as sunshine and reflection can be perceived everywhere. So just as sunshine and its reflection can be perceived everywhere, the presence of the Lord can be seen everywhere by a liberated soul. In the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Kapila explains how to realize the Supreme Lord as a super soul. He gives an example. Just as a chariot of air carries an aroma from its source and immediately catches the sense of smell, similarly, one who is constantly engaged in devotional service in Krishna consciousness can catch the Supreme Soul who is equally present everywhere. So when we might pass through a garden, we might not see a flower or we might not see a plant with a beautiful flower. But when there is a breeze that is flowing, we might take the smell. Oh, suddenly we will, oh, this is the smell of a beautiful rose flower. This is the smell of nice tulsi plant. We can just by the process of sense of smell, we are able to take the smell of that flower or plant. Similarly, one who is constantly engaged in the devotional service can understand the presence of the Lord as the Supreme Soul who is being present everywhere. So that means when one practices devotional service to the extent that one surrenders, he can understand that the Lord is there in all our hearts as the Paramatma teacher. Not only is present, he is witnessing each and every thought process also, not only the activities, and that is the result, that is the cause of one living entity getting another material body. Because one might have a desire. For example, one might think, I must become a president of a country in um, that desire will be there. But then what happens is that one must have not only desire, one must deserve also. So the Lord as Paramatma, he is seated and he sees what this particular person has got qualification. And if a person is qualified to be a president of a country, in the next birth, he gets the opportunity to become president of the country. Similarly, the Lord is present in all the living entities and he fulfills the desires of all the living entity subject to his getting the necessary qualification for the same. So he is also a facilitator, he is a maintainer. The Lord, the moment one leaves the body, the super soul also leaves the body. When the super soul leaves the body, the soul leaves the body. So the Lord is observing, is maintaining, is also facilitating. And this part of it one can understand by when one is properly situated in devotional service to Krishna. Not only this, one can also realize by his way indirectly, the Lord states in Bhagavad Gita, the splendor of the sun, which dissipates the darkness of the whole world, comes from me. The Lord says that light from the sun also comes from me. And the splendor of the moon and the splendor of fire also from me. That means the light that is emanating from the sun or the light that is emanating from the moon or this splendor that is coming out of the fire, they are all emanations from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In fact, the splendor of the moon is a reflection of what comes out of the sunlight from the sun. Similarly, the sunlight is a reflection of coming out from the Brahma, on the sun planet, coming from the Brahma Jyoti. So from Brahma Jyoti's reflection comes sun. From the reflection of sun comes moon, and the reflection of moon we see. And it is also said that the splendor of electricity, all these are origin is sunshine, but ultimately the sunshine which emanates from sun, the sun is also compared to the eye of the Lord. Similarly, everything is originating from the Supreme Lord, maintained by the Supreme Lord, and at the right fixed periodical time, everything is annihilated and they enter into the body of the Lord. The Lord also states in Bhagavad Gita that moon is one of the stars, not all is one of them. The sunlight is due to the spiritual effulgence in the spiritual sky of the Supreme Lord. This is also mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. With the rise of the sun, the activities of human beings are set up. So normally, when the sun rises, we all feel that we should get up and start our activities. So the sun is the path. Then he also says that they set the rising of the sun, one starts to prepare food, set fire for footstep. They set fire to start the factory. So many things happen with the rise of the sun. So fire is also the cause of, is a cause from the sunrise, from the sunlight. So sunrise, fire, moonlight, they're all pleasing to the living entities. Without their help, no living entity can live. That means if there is no sunlight, there is no moonlight, there is no fire, living entities cannot live. And all these are emanating from the personality of Godhead. So this is the beginning of the Krishna consciousness. When one begins to Krishna consciousness, we start thinking on these lines. By the moonshine, all the vegetables are nourished. So whatever we eat, vegetables, fruits, they are all nourished by the presence of moonshine. And if moonshine is not there, they cannot get nourishment. So without Krishna's mercy, there cannot be any sun and there cannot be any moon. And without his mercy, there cannot be any fire. So without the help of sun, moon, and fire, no one can live. These are some of the processes by which one can understand the presence of Krishna in each and every product. Then he says, I enter into each planet. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, I enter into each planet and by my energy, they stay in orbit. I become the moon and thereby supply the juice of life to all vegetables. That means, like I mentioned before, the Lord enters into each and every universe as Garbhodakasaya Vishnu, and he supplies the juice or essence to all the vegetables and plants. And then in Bhagavad Gita, one sloka, he says, I am the fire of digestion in the bodies of all living entities, and I join with the air of life, outgoing and incoming to digest the four kinds of food stuff. So as per Ayurveda, the digestion that takes place in our stomach is basically due to a fire that is there in the stomach. And that is happening because of the presence of the Lord as the super soul. Then he says, I join with the air of life, outgoing and incoming, to digest the four kinds of food stuff. So air enters into the stomach. The food is also put into the stomach through the mouth. So, and then there is a fire. With the combination of fire, the food gets digested. Sometimes one may not be hungry because there is no fire. That fire, the cause is the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself in the form of fire. So since he is helping the digestion of all the kinds of food stuff, the living entity is not independent in the eating process. So if the Lord does not facilitate the digestion of a living entity, then one cannot have that proper digestion, which means the living entity is not independent of the Supreme Lord. So unless and until the Supreme Lord facilitates the jivas in every possible function of the body cannot function effectively. So that is why we see somebody may be having a poor hearing because the Supreme Lord does not permit something that has happened in the previous life. So by his grace, we are trying to enjoy this life without understanding that we are not the enjoyers, not be the proprietors of this body. Ultimately, the Lord is a cause. He is the owner of the body. He is the maintainer of the body. ultimately, when the soul leaves the body, nothing can happen. That also happens by the mercy of the super soul. This way, by through these various aspects, one can realize that the Lord is present as the super soul in every living entity. And this is confirmed in various scriptures also, like Vishnu Purana and others, that the Lord is present as the super soul. This all have for the class today. So if anybody has got any questions, any comments, they can ask me.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for explaining all these how Krishna maintains us.
Yes,
So thank you for the nice explanation and to relating with the Bhagavad Gita chapter 15. Thank you.
thank you, Babu. Thank you, Babu. Anybody else?
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Babu. Anybody else? Thank you. If there is no question, can I leave, Prabhu?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada jai. Hmm.